"Get that filth out of the way," Marcus roared, as his polished leather boot connected with the cardboard cup, sending the few meager coins inside scattering across the frozen concrete like hail. Arthur flinched, not from the physical impact, but from the sheer venom in the young executive's voice, and he huddled deeper into his torn woolen coat as the biting wind of the New York financial district whipped around the corner of the Sterling Tower. "Look at you," Marcus spat while adjusting his silk tie, his breath forming angry clouds in the freezing air. "You are sitting right in front of my building and destroying the corporate image, so move it before I call security to drag you into the alley where you belong." Arthur did not look up immediately, because he needed to maintain the ruse, so he kept his gaze fixed on a rusted dime that had rolled into a crack in the pavement near his trembling hand. "Please, sir," Arthur rasped, forcing his voice to sound weaker than it actually was. "I am just trying to get enough for a cup of coffee to keep warm because the shelter is full and I have nowhere else to go." Marcus laughed, a sharp and cruel sound that cut through the city noise, and he took a deliberate sip of his own steaming latte while looking down at the old man. "Coffee is for closers and for people who actually contribute to society, not for parasites who are too lazy to work. If you are cold, then you should have thought about that before you became a failure." Just as Marcus raised his foot to kick the empty cup again, the heavy glass revolving doors of the tower whooshed open, and a small hurried figure in a gray janitorial uniform stepped out into the biting chill. Sarah gripped her broom tightly, her knuckles white against the handle, and her heart hammered against her ribs because she knew exactly who Marcus was. He was the vice president of sales, a man who could have her fired with a single snap of his fingers, yet her feet moved on their own accord toward the scene. "Mr. Reynolds, please," Sarah said softly, her voice shaking as she lowered her head in a sign of submission. "He is not hurting anyone, and he's just sitting by the planter, so please do not trouble yourself on such a cold morning." Marcus spun around, his eyes narrowing as if he had just stepped in something unpleasant, and he looked Sarah up and down with the same disdain he had shown the beggar. "Oh, great," Marcus sneered. "Now the trash is defending the garbage. Sarah, I do not pay you to be a social worker for the homeless population of Manhattan. I pay you to keep my floors clean so that my clients do not have to look at people like him or you. Get back inside before I decide that we need a younger janitor who knows her place." Sarah flinched as if she had been slapped, but instead of retreating into the warmth of the lobby, she knelt down on the wet, icy pavement next to Arthur. "I am sorry about him," Sarah whispered to Arthur, while her trembling fingers retrieved a quarter from a puddle of slush. Arthur looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, noting the exhaustion etched into the lines of her face and the way her thin coat offered no protection against the 20-degree weather. "Why are you helping me?" Arthur asked quietly, dropping the weak old man act for just a split second. "You heard him. He will fire you." Sarah placed the wet coins back into Arthur's cup and reached into her pocket to pull out a wrapped sandwich that was clearly meant to be her own lunch. "He might fire me," Sarah said with a sad smile as she pressed the sandwich into Arthur's hands. "But if I lose my humanity just to keep a job, then I am poorer than anyone on this street. Take this. It is turkey and cheese, and it will give you some energy." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat that had nothing to do with the cold, because in 30 years of building Sterling Enterprises, no one had ever offered him their own lunch without expecting something in return. As Sarah stood up to rush back to her duties, Arthur noticed a hole in the sole of her shoe, revealing a wet sock underneath. "Thank you, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice firm and clear. "I will remember this." Sarah just gave a hurried wave and ran back toward the revolving doors, terrified that Marcus was watching from the lobby, but she did not see the look of steel determination that settled over Arthur. The billionaire pulled a small concealed voice recorder from his pocket and clicked the stop button. "Strike one, Mr. Reynolds," Arthur whispered to the wind. He stood up, shaking the snow from his shoulders, but just as he prepared to leave, a black luxury sedan screeched to a halt at the curb, and the back window rolled down to reveal another one of his top executives. Arthur recognized the polished rims of his own Maybach immediately, and he saw the panic in Alfred's eyes as the loyal driver prepared to jump out and rescue his employer from the freezing cold. However, Arthur gave a sharp, imperceptible shake of his head, signaling Alfred to hold his position, because the audit of the human soul was not yet complete. As the sedan idled silently at the curb, blending into the traffic, Arthur stood up and turned his back on the safety of the car to face the towering glass facade of his life's work. He pushed his weight against the heavy revolving door, shuffling his feet to maintain the character of the weary transient, and as the glass spun, the biting wind of the street was instantly replaced by the scent of lavender and expensive leather. The warmth of the lobby hit him like a physical blow, thawing his frozen ears. But the atmosphere inside was colder than the blizzard outside, as dozens of conversations stopped instantly. Receptionists froze with phones halfway to their ears, and high-powered brokers paused mid-stride, their eyes locking onto the disheveled figure dripping dirty slush onto the pristine Italian marble. Marcus, who was standing by the elevator bank laughing with two junior associates, turned around slowly, and his face went from a healthy pink to a deep, violent crimson. "You have got to be kidding me!" Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings and shattering the professional silence of the room. "Security!" Marcus screamed, pointing a manicured finger at Arthur. "Get this animal out of here immediately and throw him into the street, and do not be gentle about it because he clearly does not understand English." Two burly security guards in dark uniforms uncrossed their arms and marched toward Arthur with grim determination, their heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the floor. Arthur shrank back, feigning terror, and raised his hands to protect his face as the first guard reached out to grab the collar of his tattered coat. "Stop it!" Sarah cried out, her voice cracking as she shoved the guard's arm away with surprising strength for a woman of her age. "He is an old man, and he is freezing to death. So how can you treat him like a stray dog when he hasn't done anything wrong?" The lobby went deathly silent, and even the security guards hesitated, looking from the furious executive to the trembling janitor who dared to defy orders. Marcus walked over slowly, the sound of his expensive shoes clicking ominously on the floor, and he stopped inches from Sarah's face. "You really are stupid, aren't you, Sarah?" Marcus hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that carried more weight than his shouting. "You choose to protect a bum over obeying a direct order from the vice president of this company." Marcus straightened up and adjusted his cufflinks, looking around the room to ensure he had an audience for what came next. "You are fired, effective immediately, so give me your badge and get your things, and then you can join your boyfriend out in the snow, because that is clearly where you both belong." Sarah's shoulders slumped, and the fight drained out of her body as the reality of his words settled in, meaning no paycheck, no rent money, and no heating for the winter. She reached up with shaking hands to unclasp her ID badge, the plastic clicking softly in the silence, and she held it out to Marcus while tears spilled over her cheeks. "I am sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to do what was right." Marcus snatched the badge from her hand with a sneer and tossed it into a nearby trash can like it was a used tissue. "Right does not pay the bills," Marcus scoffed, turning his back on her. "Security, remove them both, now." The guard stepped forward again, reaching for Sarah's arm to escort her out, but before they could make contact, a deep, authoritative voice boomed through the lobby like a thunderclap. "Taking your hands off her would be a very wise career move, gentlemen." The voice did not sound like the raspy whine of a homeless man anymore. It sounded like the boardroom commands that had built a billion-dollar empire. Marcus spun around, confused by the sudden change in tone, and his mouth fell open as he watched Arthur slowly unbutton the dirty, torn woolen coat. Arthur shrugged the heavy garment off his shoulders, letting it pile onto the floor, revealing a bespoke charcoal gray three-piece suit underneath that cost more than Marcus's car. Arthur adjusted his silk tie, smoothed down his lapels, and fixed Marcus with a glare that could cut glass. "Pick that badge up out of the trash, Marcus," Arthur commanded, his voice calm but terrifyingly cold. "And apologize to the lady, or security will be escorting you out of this building instead." "Mr. Sterling," Marcus stammered, his voice trembling so violently that the name barely escaped his throat. "I did not know it was you. I thought it was just some vagrant trying to cause trouble." Marcus took a step back, his hands shaking as he smoothed his tie, trying desperately to salvage a career that was already dead in the water. "If I had known it was a test, sir, I would have handled the situation differently, because you know how much I respect this company and your legacy." Arthur did not blink, nor did he acknowledge the pathetic excuse, and he simply pointed a long, steady finger at the stainless steel trash can near the reception desk. "I gave you an order, Marcus. Pick up her badge." The lobby was so quiet that the hum of the HVAC system sounded like a jet engine, and every employee in the vicinity watched with bated breath as their arrogant boss faced his reckoning. Marcus looked at the trash can, then at the watching crowd, and finally at Arthur's unyielding stone face. Slowly, agonizingly, Marcus bent his knees, his expensive suit straining as he lowered himself to the floor, and he reached into the garbage to fish out the plastic ID card he had tossed away only moments before. "Give it to her," Arthur commanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "And apologize." Marcus turned to Sarah, his face burning with a mixture of shame and suppressed rage, and he held the badge out to the woman he had just tormented. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Marcus mumbled, refusing to meet her eyes. Arthur stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and his former executive until he was looming over him. "You said that this man was destroying the corporate image," Arthur said, gesturing to the pile of rags on the floor. "But poverty is not what destroys a company, Marcus. Cruelty is. You treat people based on the size of their wallet rather than the content of their character, and that is a liability I cannot afford to keep on my payroll. You are fired, effective immediately. So please, hand your security pass to the guards and vacate the building before I have you charged for trespassing." As the revolving doors spun Marcus out into the freezing cold that he had so callously wished upon others, Arthur turned his attention to Sarah, who was still standing frozen in shock, clutching her broom as if it were a lifeline. Arthur's expression softened immediately, the steel leaving his eyes as he took the badge from her hand and gently clipped it back onto her uniform collar. "I am sorry I had to deceive you, Sarah," Arthur said softly. "I have been looking for a successor to run my charitable foundation, someone who understands that true leadership is about service, not status. I spent a week on these streets, and hundreds of people walked past me, including my own board of directors. But only the woman with the least to give offered me everything she had. I do not want you to clean these floors anymore, Sarah. I want you to be the Director of Employee Welfare for Sterling Enterprises, with a starting salary of $200,000 a year and a full benefits package that includes a company car." Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as her knees buckled, but Arthur caught her by the elbows to steady her. "Mr. Sterling, I cannot," Sarah sobbed, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'm just a janitor. I do not know how to be a director." Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "You know how to be human," Arthur replied, "and that is the only qualification that cannot be taught." Arthur guided Sarah toward his private elevator, ignoring the whispers and stares of the crowd, and as the doors slid shut, sealing them off from the world below, the lobby erupted into spontaneous applause. Outside the glass walls, Marcus stood alone in the snow, shivering in his suit as the wind whipped around him, watching the elevator lights rise higher and higher toward the penthouse, realizing too late that the most expensive thing he ever lost was his own humanity. True wealth is not measured by what you have in your pocket, but by what you are willing to give when you have nothing at all.